Secretly recorded from deep inside the bowels of a decommissioned missile silo, we bring you the man, one single man who wants to bring light to the darkness and dark to the lightness. Although he's not always right, he is always certain. So now, with security protocols in place, the protesters have been forced back behind the barricades and the blast doors are now sealed. Without further delay, let me introduce you to the host of HuttCast, Mr. Tim Huttner.
Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. You can now take your post. In studio today, we have Dr. Scott Jenson. He has graciously accepted my invitation to visit us on the HuttCast. Scott, how are you today?
I am doing well, Hutt. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, we appreciate it. And we're going to get into some pretty interesting conversations and topics here. So HuttCast will be back in just a moment. Stand by for HuttCast. Buying a gun is no ordinary purchase. Whether you're a hunter, competitive shooter, or self-defense is your priority, there are many kinds of guns and many kinds of training programs. You use your brain all the time. You will rarely need to use your gun. Before you find yourself in a situation where you need to make a critical decision, make sure your training is the best you can get. It could be the difference between life and death, or freedom or detention. For the best quality training, check out permittocarry.us. If you live in Minnesota or Wisconsin or even Florida, give Gene German a call, 612-388-2403. That's Permit to Carry US. Or call Gene German at 612-388-2403. Welcome back, HuttCast. Dr. Scott Jenson is in the studio today. We are going to ask him some questions, but first, Scott, can you tell us about yourself?
Well, I'm a small town kid from Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, and I was a middle child of 5. I learned early in life that if your older sister is bigger, stronger, and smarter than you, it's not going to work out well if you pick a fight. My dad was my hero, and my mom was my best friend. I graduated from public high school within a small class of 65, and I was valedictorian, and then I went to the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis for my undergraduate work. Unfortunately, and very much in a devastating manner, my mom died of colon cancer in her 40s just after I went to college. So that was a real heartbreaking experience for me because she and I were so close. Right at that same time, I was accepted into dental school a year early. So I went to dental school and was elected president of the class. And I enjoyed the biochemistry and the anatomy and so much of the curriculum, but I found that I really wasn't having a love affair with teeth. So that was problematic. So I did the logical thing. I requested a leave of absence and went to the seminary. And so I spent a year in the seminary studying Old Testament books as well as Reformation history. And that was the year I decided to do 2 big things. One is I asked my beautiful girlfriend if she would marry me, and she said yes. And we've been together 43 years. And I also decided to go into medical school. And that worked out really well. Mary is a veterinarian, and we have 3 children. Christy is an anesthesiologist. Matt is an estate attorney, and Jackie is a family doc. We have 6 grandchildren with a 7th on the way. And we have indeed been blessed. I've always sort of thought of my life a little bit like that of George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life.
Mm-hmm. How awesome is that? 1 on the way, huh?
1 on the way.
And that's how many for you?
That'll be 7.
Holy cow. Christmas must be hectic.
It is, but my wife is an all-star grandma, so she really relieves Grandpa of an awful lot of the tasks that I might otherwise have to perform.
Well, it takes a strong woman behind guys like us to do stuff, right?
It sure does. And I outkicked my coverage.
Oh, boy. Look out. So I want to make this show about you. And we all got the hyperbole out there of everybody. They got the same, really, we all have the same type of wants and desires and needs of our system. But we really don't ask you, the candidates, what makes sense in your heart. I mean, we know what it does. We know what you say. But let's take, for instance, let's jump right into this. And I had to use Minneapolis the whole time because the state's so much bigger than that. When Waltz decided to not push the button and get the guard in here, tell me how you would have handled that a little differently.
I think that Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, they were confronted with a difficult situation, to be sure, but I think it got away from them. I don't think that they were ready to make the hard, decisive actions. Teddy Roosevelt said that in times of difficult decision-making, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. But the worst thing you can do is nothing. And that's what Governor Walz did. And I think that's why we saw some of the TV journalists saying things like, "Where's our governor?" Jacob Fry was a rookie mayor. He evidently put a request in for support from the National Guard. The way in which he did it may have not been precisely correct, but to wait 48 hours when Minneapolis was burning, and I think to know in advance that the 3rd Precinct building was going to be burned, and to be a part of the process that issued a stand-down order so that the police who had been serving that area for years had to carry out the governor's orders and literally step away from their home base. This was not just a building. This was a spirit. This was the esprit de corps place that they gathered together in the morning. I actually had a patient who was one of the police that worked there, and he had been told, if you've got memorabilia hanging around, you better take it down because it probably won't be here tomorrow. That was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It should have been much earlier, and we should have recognized that things were out of control. I think there was a certain amount of pandering. There were rules and regulations for various kinds of activities around the Twin Cities at the time, but it seemed that if you were demonstrating and even in many situations rioting, some of the rules in regards to the COVID pandemic didn't seem to apply. Honestly, I think that there were so many cities around the United States that burned because of the way Minneapolis was handled.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was insane. I'm from down there, and I'm looking at this going, really? What I don't get is again, like you said, why he waited so long. We had a rookie mayor. Again, the whole Minneapolis thing is not the whole state, but it's kind of on a big ticket here, and it made me think twice about why we do things and how we stop them. So, what else can you give us on that information?
I think that Governor Walz froze, and I think part of it was he didn't want to disappoint anyone. I think when you're in a role of leader, you need to lead, recognizing that you won't always be able to get universal approval for your actions. I also think that it's critically important to remember those leaders who have gone before you. And what I mean by that is there had been preparations. These kinds of things have happened in other cities. There was a plan. There were capable people in the chain of command who should have been tapped on the shoulder, and she or he advised, you need to tell me what you think you need to be doing, and I will hear all the voices and we will go forward. I don't think that's what happened. I think groupthink sort of took over. There was an excessive amount of cautiousness born of concern regarding the politics of the situation.
Right.
And that was literally a fatal flaw. In Minneapolis, arguably, we had over 500,000 billion of damage. And again, cities all over the nation suffered because Minnesota handled their situation so poorly. And obviously, we were ground level zero.
Right. Well, we had a pretty good trigger on that. Do you think, at the time, Ariando, how do you think he handled the situation with the resistance he had from his government?
You know, Hutt, I'm not really that interested in doing too much sort of Monday morning quarterbacking.
Right.
I think that the buck has to stop at the desk of the person who's in charge. And to me, in that situation, it was Jacob Fry and Tim Walz.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the police were put in an impossible situation, as was the chief. And I think that I'm not privy to some of those conversations and potentially conflicting opinions.
Sure.
But I think that everybody did okay for the most part, with the obvious exception of Derek Chauvin and his colleagues. And I think that subsequently we saw Governor Walz and Mayor Fry freeze up and basically allow all hell to break loose.
Oh, it was like a Beirut type of scene. You know, you saw the pictures and it's like, how can this be happening in South Minneapolis? It was incredible.
It sure was.
Now, I do know when they deployed, some of the guardsmen didn't have live ammunition. They put them out there with blanks and rounds and stuff like that. Would you have done that? I mean, quarterbacking from the armchair here?
I would have leaned into the commanders of the police officers. They've been trained to make decisions in this regard. You might have a certain squadron of officers doing one thing and another squadron doing another, depending upon if you're having reinforcements or where you're putting your frontline folks. Again, I think that for someone such as myself that doesn't have the experience in terms of when is it best to call for this response or that response, I mean, I think even your fire department has a role to play there. We also need to make certain that the media is protected. We need to make certain that the healthcare workers and first responders are being protected. We obviously don't want ricocheting bullets, damaging or injuring people.
Yep.
So I really think that in a situation like that, that's very complicated, there's a reason there's a chain of command. And I think that chain of command, it has to work. And it doesn't mean that the leader has to feel like he or she is smarter than everybody lower than him or her in the chain of command. It just simply means that each one of those pieces along the way leading up to your position will have something to contribute. You've got to bring all that together, integrate it, make a decision, and very likely cross-check it with the people who are going to be implementing your decision-making. But that's what you do. And you cannot allow an addiction to approval to take you over such that you would freeze. And I think that happens. Some people just are not willing to make a decision because someone might disapprove. And I'm sorry, that's a part of leadership.
Lead by example, right?
Yes. And take the consequences.
Yes. But I like your point there about being able to make a decision because your voting base might, frown against it. I mean, boy, every politician has that fear, don't they?
Some more than others, Hutt. I really think that one of the lessons I learned when I was in the Senate for the one term I served, I was astonished at how much emphasis was placed not on satisfying intellectual curiosity or being laser focused on determining what would be the best solution, but instead so much energy went towards protecting the next election.
Yep.
I remember I'd never heard the phrase, you'll get a postcard challenge. And I said, what is that? Actually, I guess it was a postcard campaign. They said, they'll mount a postcard campaign. I said, what do you mean? Well, if you say that or say this, someone will pluck that out of context. They'll put it on a postcard. They'll mail it to 5,000 people in your district, and then you'll be sunk. And I said, well, so be it. I didn't come down here to find a new career path. I came down here to solve some problems, serve the people that I, if you will, live with in the community and the county, and then get out of the way.
Sure. All right. Let's shift gears a little. How are you in the 2A? Are you a big 2A guy, or is it not a thing for you?
It's a huge thing for me.
Okay.
Again, I learned so much in that first term. I've always been a strong Second Amendment supporter. I've got a dozen guns myself, and while I'm not the best shot, I think I've had my share of pheasants and ducks and geese, and I did go wild boar hunting a few years ago, and that was enjoyable. But when I was in the Senate, I remember it was in 2018. There was an event where I think 17 students and staff were massacred in Parkland, Florida on Valentine's Day.
Okay.
And I remember in the weeks to come, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of parents and grandparents and concerned folks came to the Capitol wanting to have a conversation about what can we do here in Minnesota to make certain that this isn't going to happen. What can we do to harden the targets? Can school teachers who have a legal permit to carry be allowed to carry? Because the law was that if you didn't have the permission of the superintendent, that you could be conceivably fired. Those were things that were going on. And in the midst of that, basically, many of us first year senators were told to more or less shut up, sit down, and stay in line. And I remember saying, well, let's have a informational hearing. Let's have a conversation. And I was told, no, just ignore them. They'll go away. And I was very clear. I said, well, I did not run to be in the Senate so that I could ignore folks who had legitimate concerns. So I did make sort of a rookie move in terms of trying to compel a conversation. And I put my name on a bill telling the author, I won't vote for this bill the way it is, but it is a bill that will explore whether or not the background statutes that we have in place are working. I was cognizant of the fact that there were some problems because my brother had been involuntarily committed to a mental health hospital in Minnesota. And as such, he became, if you will, a prohibited individual who was not allowed to purchase guns. And yet when he got out of the hospital, he was able to purchase a gun without any difficulty. And when I made some inquiries, I was told that that's because sometimes the mental health hospitals were not forwarding the health information to the NICS database. And so there was no way for the police or the BCA
to stop it.
Yeah. And so I put my name on a bill, and I told the author, I said, work with the NRA, work with the Minnesota gun owners. If you can craft a bill that supports my Second Amendment rights and potentially plugs some gaps in terms of prohibited individuals, we might have something, but otherwise I'm going to take my name off the bill. And that was one way to compel a conversation. And after, I think, 5 or 6 weeks, there was nothing happening. And so I removed my name from the bill, and I told the author that I was disappointed that there hadn't been any effort to make it something. And so that was the end of it. But I did get in hot water there because people felt like my willingness to push for that conversation was indicative of something that I had no idea people would assume. And I've never felt like I was anything other than just a staunch Second Amendment supporter. And when I ran in 2016, I was endorsed by the NRA. I was endorsed by the Minnesota gun owners. And in the 2016 election, I received more votes than any other Republican senator in the state.
Awesome. Well, are you familiar that I'm a Class 7 manufacturer of weapons?
Not very.
We have that in our shop, and I'm a gun builder. So one of those 2A things are pretty hot on my list. A lot of my listeners are big 2Ers, which is it's a win for you because, I mean, they're staunch Republicans. I believe that there are plenty of laws on the books to have the right people have the right weapons or their freedom of weapon, but they're just not enforced. Now, I did an episode that was on the gun show loop, okay, where they were buying these guns off the table and all this stuff, and you didn't need to go through the 4473 form. How can we create more laws for gun owners, which really law-abiding citizens, when you can't keep them out of the hands of the people who are stealing them, who are breaking in, who are, illegal guns? Why would more gun laws on the books help anything?
I think you make a very good point, Hut. And I think in a perfect world, there would not need to be any more laws on the books. But I think right now, with the way things stand, we find our Second Amendment rights jeopardized such that I think it's critical that we need to, as soon as possible, pass a stand your ground bill so that you don't need to demonstrate that that you tried to retreat, because I don't think you should have to. I think you should be able to take care of business. You're a law-abiding citizen. You find yourself in harm's way. I don't think you should have to demonstrate that you tried to retreat. And I think right along with that, I think we should have constitutional carry at the age of 18.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that we need to do a couple more things. And I haven't heard them talked about, and it's disappointing. But I think we need to have castle doctrine passed so that your home, your business, and your vehicle, as well as a campsite or wherever else you might be laying your head on a pillow, that these areas are your domain. You can take care of business if you find yourself in harm's way. And again, that's your right. And I think we need to do one other thing. And I think that is we need to pass Good Samaritan legislation.
Oh boy.
Such that if you encounter a situation where you could be helpful, I don't want someone like you, Hut, who's obviously trained and well-skilled to potentially be able to assist in that situation. I don't want you running the other way because you think you have to by law. I want you making an assessment, and if you think you can help, I want you to be able to go in there and help in the same way that me as a physician might stop and help someone in a Good Samaritan fashion. I have coverage through Good Samaritan legislation, and I think we need to do that in regards to Good Samaritans who try to help out in catastrophic shooting situations.
Big time. That's a big time question. That's a hardball here now.
And I think the other thing that really troubles me is that, again, when we don't have courageous conversations in the legislature, we allow things to go undetected. For instance, there's an awful lot of folks that do not realize that if they have been identified as an eligible medical marijuana patient, even if they're not using medical marijuana for a medicinal purpose, they, in Minnesota statute, essentially forfeit their Second Amendment rights.
For sure.
And this is wrong.
It's on the list of 4473. It's a question.
It is. And this is wrong. This is a medicinal drug that they may be using once every 2 months if they take a chemotherapy. I think that to do this and to not have patients even know that, because there's an awful lot of patients that would not have even, if you will, sought to become a medical marijuana patient had they known the consequences.
Right. The feds changed the forms on the 4473s that states, are you a habitual user of narcotics, marijuana, all these things? And if you say no to that and they find out you're on this municipal stuff, that's a felony.
Exactly. I think what we should be doing is we could certainly do a variety of things, but I think we have to have that hard discussion so that we can have some experts come in and say, okay, this would be a possible solution, or this would, or if you have not used any medical marijuana in 14 days, then you're good to go. There's a variety of things we can do, but we're not going to know what to do unless we start asking the questions, because too often elected officials start with the conclusion and work backwards. And I think what you need to do is you need to ask questions of people like yourself who are knowledgeable, ask questions of the police, ask questions of the pharmacologists. This is the only way you really find the guardrails within which you will find your best answer.
That's a pretty nice statement there.
There's no question that when I was in the Senate, I was identified as someone who was willing to look at almost any bill. And remember, I got in hot water because there was a recreational marijuana legalization bill. And they wanted to have a hearing. And they came to me and asked, a couple of Democrats came to me and asked me if I would sign on to the bill. And I asked what it did. And they told me, and I said, no, thanks. And they said, well, would you at least read it? And I said, well, I'll read it. So I took it. And it was about a 35 or 40 page bill. And it was really not a well-written bill. The definitions of cannabidiol and cannabinoids and THC and cannabis and the various cannabis plants and the various species were poorly defined. Even spelling errors were made. But beyond that, there were two pieces in that 35, 40-page bill that intrigued me. One was decriminalizing trivial amounts of marijuana, and the other was expunging records. And both of those were things I was interested in, specifically for this reason. As a family doctor, I frequently encounter young folks who find themselves in maybe unfortunate hot water because they just made a mistake. And so maybe a 19-year-old kid gets caught with a joint in his pocket. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, I don't think we need to make that a big deal. And I think if that joint is less than an ounce and a half, it's a misdemeanor. But if it happened to be that you had, instead of 42 grams, 48 grams, it ramps up rapidly. And I thought we do not need to be over the top here. So let's be thoughtful about this. And the best way to do that is, again, ask the questions. And then if it does end up on a young person's record, I don't want that there 5 years later when they're trying to get a job with Target or Cargill or whoever. And so I thought, decriminalize and expunge records. So I told these authors, I said, well, I don't like your bill for a variety of reasons, but I like two pieces. And I said, if you want me to put my name on it to increase your likelihood of get a hearing, I will do that only if you request what's called an informational hearing, which is a hearing where the bill cannot be advanced. It can only be heard in front of experts. But what it allows us to do as legislators is we get experts coming in from all over the country, and they come and they testify, and we get to ask questions. We learn lots. And then at the end of the informational hearing, we say, thank you. The bill goes nowhere. It is dead. So that was what we did. And they said, yeah, they would be very content just to have an informational hearing. So that was scheduled. And then the chief author, came to me and said, I'm a little nervous about being on the dais and answering all the questions that are going to come my way. Would you help me? And this was a Democrat. And I said, sure, I can sit next to you and answer the questions that you don't want to field. Mm-hmm. And so we had probably a 2-hour informational meeting, which was, I thought, very helpful for everybody involved. And during that meeting, one of the senators said, Senator Jenson, if this bill were on the Senate floor as it is, would you vote for it? And I looked him straight in the eye and said, absolutely not. And I looked at the author of the bill, and she didn't flinch because she knew that that's exactly what I had told her. And yet, the fact that I was willing to do this, I've had people accuse me of, well, you want to legalize recreational marijuana. No, I don't. I don't think we're ready. I don't know if we ever will be. I don't think we have in-field testing to determine whether or not you should be operating a vehicle. I think we can learn from other states that have gone before us. Bottom line, I think we have a strong medical marijuana program in Minnesota that we can be proud of, though I think that the costs of our medical marijuana are about 3 times higher than Colorado. I think we should seriously look at decriminalizing and expunging trivial amounts of marijuana in terms of violations. But I think when Minnesota wants to make a decision regarding legalizing recreational marijuana, I do not believe that 201 legislators should necessarily make that decision. That might be, a decision we want all of Minnesota to weigh in on.
That's some pretty good words. That's a very good outlook. I appreciate that. Thank you. If we take a break, it's 27 minutes into this first segment. How about we come back and we talk about, we can see about the election fraud in Minnesota. We can talk about, of course, the Right to Try Act, which I've got some teeth into that one. What do you say we do that?
That sounds great, Hut. Thank you.
Okay, HuttCast is going to take a commercial break. It is 27:38 into this segment, and we will be back shortly. Are you looking for a home or business security system you can trust? We are Protect Security Systems. We'd like to say we've been keeping honest people honest and the dishonest something to think about for over 20 years. We offer a variety of services from home to business security, to home theater, access control, and more. Call us for your complimentary consultation on a system that fits your specific needs. Call our office in Osseo, 763-493-2020. Mention you heard this on HuttCast and you will get $50 off your next purchase. We are Protect Security. All right, we are back with HuttCast Dr. Scott Jenson, candidate for Minnesota governor. And for the record, I want to know now, Doctor, that if you win, I get like some fancy hang out at the governor's mansion in the hot tub thing. So I need some okay on that.
I would love it. What we should do is we should have you set up to do some sort of a podcast at the Capitol or at the mansion. That would be fun.
Well, you see the equipment involved, and it's not that small, so.
No, it wouldn't. You'd have to bring down sort of a bare bones operation.
Right. All right. We talked about, in the previous section, about, this Right to Try Act. Do you want to go Right to Try Act, or you want to go with the other conversation?
As a physician, a discussion of right to try is always important to me.
Okay. For your information, we have a bill introduced by Senator John Hoffman, and it's called the William Shakespeare bill. And we've had a lot of, like everyone else, we've had death in the family from COVID, due to COVID, sort of COVID, all the COVID things. Now, help me here. There is a what is that?
Monoclonal antibodies.
There it is. And
there's convalescent antibodies.
There we go. So on the Right to Try Act, he was dying in a Brainerd hospital. He wouldn't, the hospital wouldn't say, we're going to come in here and we're going to let you see your family. They just pretty much shut us off. They wouldn't allow us the right to try. They wouldn't allow a lot of things. And that kind of upsets a lot of people in the world, because there's it's the right to try state. And the medical system denied that of our family. How do you feel about some of that?
I'm angry about it. I think that what we saw happen during the COVID pandemic was horrific. We have legislation on the books regarding right to try, and that was dealing with medications that were in the pipeline but hadn't gotten approved. But the spirit was critically important. This was legislation that took place both in the state of Minnesota, many other states, as well as federally. And the reason that legislation passed in so many places was because the right to try is a critical element of health freedom. It certainly requires that element of informed consent alongside of it, but that's what physicians and patients should be doing. What we saw during the COVID pandemic was literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of instances where patients were essentially isolated. It had to feel punitive. Families were desperate to help. Frequently, the patient was not doing well, and it was evident to everybody that this patient may well die from a disease that could be, if you will, reversed, possibly, if they took this medicine or that medicine. We had government get more involved in determining what options patients would have in regards to health care in the COVID pandemic than any other time in my 40 years of medicine.
Wow.
We had doctors under the gun if they took the courage to write a prescription for ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. There was a period of time in Minnesota where Governor Walz had put into effect an emergency order that denied pharmacies the opportunity to dispense the hydroxychloroquine that physicians had written for. That was in place for 4 or 5 months. There were so many things done. But to get back to your question, there were 2 critical things that went wrong. Mm-hmm. One, somehow we had bureaucrats, elected officials, hospital administrators, doctors that somehow felt like it was okay to isolate patients. And to me, that would intuitively compromise a person's health, potentially accelerate their demise, because virtually every patient I have taken care of in 40 years does better when they know they have advocates near them, when there's a loving touch, when they know there's empathy and compassion. Mm-hmm. And we took all those elements away.
Wiped them out. Yep.
And we wondered, why did these patients not do better? So that was the one piece, the isolation. But then the heart of your question was, what about the right to try? A really good example of the opposite of what happened during COVID was 1976, when the Legionnaires' pneumonia outbreak occurred. Lots of folks had been at a convention at the American Legion Convention in Philadelphia. And after the convention was over, people dispersed and went to their homes. Over the next couple of days, many people around the country became ill with pneumonia, and the clinical picture wasn't typical. Most of those situations were identified as, gee, you had been at this convention in Philadelphia. So physicians were communicating, and there were departments of health involved. We were treating these patients with the best drugs we had, intravenous big hitters, if you will, in terms of antibiotics, and patients continued to die. Well, what did doctors do around the country? Did they freeze up, stop doing anything, and put a call into Dr. Fauci? Well, of course not. Of course not. We kept trying. We kept talking to patients, and the patients had a very in-place right to try because the physician insisted on it. And what we found was several doctors tried an old-fashioned antibiotic called erythromycin and used that. And lo and behold, these Legionnaires' pneumonia patients got better and the dying stopped. It was 9 months later that we actually were able to isolate and grow out and characterize the bacteria that was causing this Legionnaires' pneumonia and death. But it was critically important that what we saw there was government did not get involved. Patients and physicians kept working with their families in the hospitals, in the clinics, to make certain that patients had the right to get better. So at some level, when we say right to try legislation, we're sort of saying patients have the right to try to get better. And this time around, we denied an awful lot of patients that.
That should be at our core value, shouldn't it?
It should be. I think that when we tamper with the relationship between healer and patient, we run a grave risk, because doctor and patient don't automatically connect. What happens is a patient sees a doctor, and if that doctor is able to reveal and demonstrate to the patient a caring, compassionate, and competent attitude, but most importantly, an attitude of advocating for the patient, what happens from there is the patient will grow a certain level of trust in that physician. And now you've got the good thing going. You've got physician advocacy touching patient trust, and it spirals upwards, so that after a period of time, that patient is going to know without doubt that that doc is in their corner. And that doc is going to know that that patient trusts the doctor. And that's the way we get the best healthcare results. We literally fractured that beneficial spiral between patient and doctor, advocacy and trust.
And family.
Family was totally neutralized by being forced out of the picture. We locked down schools, we locked in nursing homes, we locked out families, and we wondered why all hell broke loose.
Maybe that's the demise of Waltz.
I think this is a huge chink in the armor for Tim Walz, because if young and old press the question, why did you do this? It will be very difficult for Tim Walz to find solid medical data that says that these lockdowns did what they were purported to do, because quite frankly, the lockdowns were absolutely unnecessary.
Now, for your listeners across the world, Australia, Germany, of course, we got pulled out of Russia this week, I'll have you know. And if you're listening to his words, regardless if he's running for an office or not, listen to the doctor in him. He's telling you what he knows, and you know what? It makes a lot of sense. If you're buying ivermectin on the black market, stay away from the farm stuff. Try and get some human medical grade stuff. But listen to his words, because I think there's a whole lot of truth in this. And I hope you do very well in the election. I mean, it's just, he took a lot away from a lot of people. And that sounds like, I don't know, a monarchy, perhaps? I don't know what the proper term is.
Well, it certainly felt like, for many Minnesotans, it felt like there was a tyrant at the helm. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed to never stop. When I raised my hand and said that the Department of Health was making a grave error by encouraging physicians to identify COVID-19 as a cause of death in situations where we would never have done that before, I had no idea that would turn into 5 different investigations by the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice into my license. Prior to COVID, I was named Family Doctor of the Year in 2016, and I've had a wonderful career teaching medical students and residents part-time through the University of Minnesota as an associate professor. So for me to find my life turned upside down and to have the prospect of losing my license become a very real possibility was something that I had no experience in handling emotionally. It was some dark times. It's still infuriating, but I refuse to hide. I don't think I did anything wrong. Every one of the complaints was from someone who never saw me as a physician. So clearly, the Minnesota board has been weaponized, and it's being used to silence my voice. And quite frankly, I'm insulted by that.
Well, I'm sorry you're going through that. It's almost an act of cancel culture. You know, they're gonna silence you. They did it to a president. I mean, what makes us think that we can't be silenced as well? It's
absolutely a portion of cancel culture. And Hut, I would never have dreamt that could happen to me. And I actually remember making a video where I said to the audience, I said, if it happens to me, it can happen to you. And I really meant it, because I have had that George Bailey kind of wonderful life. And to have the responsibility put on me that I have to somehow convince the Board of Medical Practice that the 4,000 or 5,000 patients I take care of and the 250,000 patient encounters in my medical career somehow don't add up to me being a solid, well-credentialed professional physician who should be in no hot water with the board. That's not what came out of this. Instead, I was constantly put on the defensive, constantly told that you have to justify this and that. My patient records were demanded by the Board of Medical Practice this most recent time, because some of my patients and I had worked out a plan where they would be using ivermectin because it was something they'd requested. And it wasn't illegal. It was off-label prescribing, which most physicians do quite a bit of. And yeah, it's been a challenging situation. I hope and pray that this chapter of ongoing investigations will be over soon.
Well, you remember the bill that I said? It's the William Shakestead bill. It's supposed to be in write-up. We're supposed to get a copy pretty soon. Senator Hoffman sent it in for us. Maybe we can get your signature on that when it comes through.
That sounds pretty intriguing. Thank you.
All right. Should we shift gears? Let's see. We're 14 minutes. Let's start your running mate here. I saw that as a check and checkmate. That was a sheer stroke of genius. Who thought of that?
I think God did.
Okay.
I met Matt and Adriana Burke about a year ago in the airport. My wife and I were traveling back from visiting close friends in Florida, and they were on the same plane. And Adriana Burke had been following my voice and my videos and my perspective in regards to COVID for a year. So we met in the runway and had a chance to get to know each other. That led to getting together and some lunches and this and that and the other thing. And So Mary and I asked Matt and Adriana if they would be our honorary chairman and chairwoman of our campaign. And they said yes.
Awesome.
And that led to more meetings and things like that. And then it was probably about 4 months ago that a couple of members of my team and I started to have fairly intensive discussions about a running mate. And it was really my team that said, we should really look hard at Matt Burke because he would be a wonderful force for good in Minnesota. And I was open to it, but I must confess that I was also struck by the fact that this would be in a day and age where virtue signaling and identity politics is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
We would have two Caucasian males between the age of 40 and 70. And I wanted to make certain that the process of looking for a lieutenant governor was broad-based. So we made no decisions in a quick hurry. We just kept talking about this person and that person and wondering where would the intersection of our skill sets be and things like that. But in the end, what it all came down to was I wanted someone with character, character in terms of having a moral compass that was driven by deep-seated convictions, and those convictions needed to be godly in nature. I don't know that you can teach character, so you have to find character.
Right.
Second thing I wanted was a skill set that would not duplicate my skill set, but enhance my skill set. In other words, I wanted someone who would be smarter and more experienced in the areas that I have gaps, and I have plenty of gaps. And so I wanted that skill set to be a good intersection with mine. And then third thing I wanted was I am a huge fan of determination. I don't like it when someone makes an effort and says, nuts, it didn't work out, I guess I'll give up. That just isn't the way I roll. So for me, it was character, skill set, determination. And every time I thought about it, it came up Matt Burke. And a couple of the team members for our campaign team were really confident that Matt would be a perfect choice. So we did a little bit of a courtship dance, meeting and talking about issues. And it was sort of ironic. Matt and I made the decision that we should have dinner with our wives if we're going to make this momentous decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so we set the date, and we were going to be meeting the day after their anniversary. And we were out to dinner with the four of us. And Adriana said to me, I'm giving up quite a bit to have dinner with you tonight. And I said, how so? And she said, well, it's our anniversary. And I looked at Matt and I said, Matt, you said that this was not your anniversary. And he shrugged his shoulder and said, I got the date mixed up.
Oh,
so it was pretty funny. We had a good laugh about that.
Oh boy.
But that was a night that the four of us said, yes, we're all in. And at our church, we occasionally talk about God promptings.
Mm-hmm.
And this just felt like one of those moments where a divine hand sort of led four people together, because this isn't just Matt Burke and Scott Jenson. This is Adriana Burke and Mary Jenson as well. This is four people embarking on an all-consuming journey. And there's thousands and thousands of Minnesotans walking alongside of us and praying for us and encouraging us. And I'm very grateful for that. But at the end of the day, four people are so invested that sometimes it's hard to fall asleep at night without thinking about what will tomorrow bring in terms of the campaign.
Yep.
It does become all-consuming.
Even at this level, for mayor, it was that way.
I believe it.
And P.S., I did not get the email that you were looking, so I would have filed for it as myself.
I wonder if you maybe should check your spam file.
Oh, golly. Yeah, the Dems are going to chew on this, and they're going to find a way to spin it to the ground. And you just don't hear about a running mate at governor ever. I mean, this is a huge thing.
well, we're going to do this totally differently. You'll find this interesting. I think 25 of the states have the governor and lieutenant governor run as a ticket.
Okay.
And you check one box for the two of them. The other half of the states in the union do not do it that way. And Minnesota, obviously, it's a one ticket thing where both names are on the same box, same line. Matt and I and our team decided we're not interested in necessarily conforming to the way things have been done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to run two separate campaigns. Think of it as a set of railroad tracks. They are going in the same direction, and they are a few feet apart, but they are separate tracks. So Matt Burke has his own website. He's got his own merchandise. He's going to be having his own calendar.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to have his issues that he really wants to drive hard on to help Minnesota be the best it can be. And Scott Jenson will have his campaign. And there will be all kinds of cross connections and crossovers. But the bottom line is we really want Minnesotans to get a chance to know who is Matt Burke, who is Scott Jenson, because I'm convinced that there is no amount of money, there is no amount of TV advertising that you can do to fend off the attacks that will occur in the last 6 weeks of the election cycle.
Right.
So I am certain that in the last 6 weeks, there will be people out there telling other people that Scott Jenson has had 10 wives, that he has horns on his forehead, and that he's an absolute derelict. I mean, I remember when I announced, it was a year ago, I think a year ago tomorrow, the next day, we announced March 16th. And I remember within 2 hours after I had announced, I had been called a failed senator, a quack, a conspiracy theorist, a nutcase, and a lunatic. And I read those tweets and the social media things, and I smiled and I said, well, shoot a mile. If that's all you're going to call me, this is going to be a cakewalk.
Nice. Ta-da-ta. Try the veal. We're here all week.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I saw, what was it, Saturday's straw poll over at the convention. You were at, 28 votes, 23%. Is that correct?
Are you talking about Chisago Lakes?
I believe so.
Yeah, Chisago Lakes. I was not able to in person get to that convention, but yes, we did win that straw vote. I wasn't even aware there was going to be one. There was, I think we had 28%, and I think people trickled down from there. I think that one of my main competitors, I think, had been at perhaps half of what I had. So I think that we felt real good about that. But the straw vote that really mattered to us, Hut, was the February 1st straw vote, which was where all the Republicans that attended precinct caucuses on Tuesday, February 1st, had a chance to vote in the straw vote for governor. And in 2018, there were approximately 10,000 people that attended caucuses around the state of Minnesota for the Republicans. In 2022, it almost doubled to 19,000. And in that straw vote, we were victorious with, I think, something over 38%. And I think our closest competitor had 13% and some change. And I think that if you added up the 2, 3, and 4 finishers, their combined total did not get to our total. So we were absolutely grateful and humbled by the way the February 1st straw vote turned out. And since then, we've been working as hard as ever to try to get people to go to state convention and be delegates for us so that we can get the endorsement.
Awesome. Very awesome. We are like 25 minutes into this segment. Let me take a commercial break. And when we come back, I want to just talk some of the bills you've been on here. You've got SF5 or 4554, which is the Gift of Talented Progress. You got a whole ton of them. I want to make the last segment a you segment. So you get to pick the topic. Sound good?
That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Hut.
Okay. We're 25:20 into this segment. Stand by. We'll be back after this. Now a word from our sponsors. Today's sponsor in part by Excel Roofing. Excel Roofing. They do it all. Roofs, siding, framing. You need a house? Give Excel a call. I've used these guys personally in the past, have a professional crew, they're conscious of your job, and they want to produce the finest quality of craftsmanship available. Excel Roofing, 763-712-0757. Again, 763-712-0757. Excel Roofing, Dayton, Minnesota. Back at you with HuttCast, Dr. Scott Jenson in studio. He has graced us with his presence today. And you know what? Why don't you tell me what you want to talk about next?
Well, I'd like to talk about the first year of the campaign.
Okay.
We launched a year ago, and my wife and I have traveled far and wide, north, south, east, and west. And one of the conclusions that we absolutely share over and over again is Minnesota's greatest resource is not its 10,000 lakes. It's people. Minnesotans are gracious, polite people. They help out. They are indeed a marvel. Now, I certainly want to promote the fact that our 10,000 lakes are pretty darn awesome. But in terms of traveling all over the state of Minnesota, I really think that one of the compelling reasons why people should seriously look at Scott Jenson for governor is because I'm convinced that people wake up in the morning wanting to do good things. They want to work hard, take care of their family. They want to grow. They want to learn. They want to share. I think that in the northern part of the state, it has been devastating to so many folks up there that they have not been allowed to steward the land as they normally would, utilize the land. Those folks up there want to be able to mine, and miners should mine. We can do that safely, and we can do that preserving the land. Nobody will want to steward the land better than the people who live there and who are raising children there and grandchildren. I grew up in southern Minnesota, and we bristle at the notion of urban dwellers telling us how to steward our land. We farmers want to farm. We small business people want to be able to operate our small businesses. Bottom line is farmers should farm, miners should mine, teachers should teach. We need to remember those things. In Minnesota, we have a bit of a dyad in the sense that we have these major urban centers, Duluth, Rochester, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and then we have so much greater Minnesota where the communities are not in the six figures. We need to make certain that every area is given the chance to flourish. When I was in the Senate, I always tried to look at legislation from that perspective. Who is it going to help? Who is it going to hurt? What was the problem we were trying to solve? When I was a first-year senator, I remember being humbled by being asked to be on the first major bill conference committee. And that was perhaps a first in the history of state of Minnesota in regards to it being a healthcare bill dealing with reinsurance. But I was on that conference committee and we got that done. I remember at the end of the first year, the majority leader asked me if I would chair a Senate subcommittee on healthcare access and affordability. And so I did that. And that subcommittee's work spawned numerous bills that were proposed and passed over the next 3 years. We were able to bring a level of transparency into healthcare billing that had never occurred before. In 2017, you might also find it interesting, Hutt, that when Governor Dayton collapsed during his State of the State address, I was the physician who scrambled down the aisle to help revive him. In 2018, we had lots of bills go on, and we had a fairly big bonding bill take place. In 2019, I was chief author of 7 bills that went to the Senate floor. And while I was flattered that all 7 bills passed, what was remarkable was that every one of those 7 bills passed unanimously with not one Democrat voting against my bills.
Wow.
One of those bills was a heavy hitter. It was an entirely new chapter in state law dealing with pharmacy benefit managers, and the 3 large pharmacy benefit managers in Minnesota are Express Scripts, Optum, and CVS Caremark.
Mm-hmm.
And they really weren't necessarily in the mood to be registered and licensed to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, as well as not being allowed to put gag clauses in their contracts with their participating pharmacies.
Oh, boy.
But this is what our bill contained, and that got passed, and that was a big deal. And then in 2020, just as COVID was hitting, the insulin safety net bill was floundering. And so the Senate Majority Leader asked me if I would take over that bill. And he also said, if we don't get this bill passed this session, we're going to pay for it come the November election.
SF-24, correct?
I don't remember the numbers on the Senate files. I was author or chief author or...
Alex Smith Installation Availability Act?
That's correct,
Yeah,
yes.
that's SF-24. I was reading that one.
Yes, and I worked with Nicole Holt-Smith, and I worked with Elise Mann, a physician and a Democrat in the House. She carried it in the House, and we hammered that through. I remember meeting with Governor Walz in his office in the Capitol to try to make certain that we could get past the barriers that we needed to get past in order to get the bill done, and we did that. And then the Big Pharma took our bill to court about 3 days before it was supposed to go into action, and Big Pharma lost that case. So the bill is indeed law, and it has helped hundreds of people who might have been in potentially dire straits without that bill that helped them get their insulin supplies. So I had a chance to, in my Senate term, get quite a bit done, but gee, for the amount of time and the amount of effort that you put in, we should be a far more efficient body. There is just so much gridlock and so much posturing and pandering. It's just, it's a little sad to say the least.
Well, I can only imagine. And if you see this William Shakespeare bill, I'm only assuming that the Hospital Association will not be too happy with what's, there's teeth in it now. I mean, it's also a part of the right to try. Again, not to beat that to death, but they're not going to be happy. And I personally, I don't care. They shouldn't pick this, like you said earlier. It's between the patient and the families and advocates.
I agree with you. I think the hospitals will make the adjustments necessary. But the bottom line is, you never get good at being in the hospital, because that's not a place you get admitted to a lot of times in your life.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, you may not ever get really good at how to buy a house and negotiate. The same thing with buying a car. You're sort of at a disadvantage. Well, the hospitals know exactly what they need to know in terms of how to maximize billing and revenues and things like that. So to me, it seems like a fair trade that this time around, after we've seen what happened with COVID pandemic, we should be advocating for the patients. And never again should we be causing the premature dying of people who are isolated from their families. And there were some given situations that I am aware of, without question, where patients died in the hospital because they did not have an advocate there.
Yep.
They did not have family there saying, Bill, did you get your medicines today? Gertrude, how come your pills are still sitting there and haven't been taken today?
Yep.
There is no question that an advocating family can enhance the quality of care in a hospital setting.
What's your take on the, I did a show on Mercy Medical Mayhem, it was called, and it was, I lived it, so it was pretty graphic. And when Mercy had that guy west of the cities here, and he was on the ventilator, and they had to ship him to Texas for the right to try. What's your take on that deal?
I don't know the details of it. I know that I was called the night before the ventilator was going to be turned off. And so someone close to the family had contacted me to see if I could help. So I did a couple of suggestions. And then the next day, this...
the court injuncted.
Yeah, this situation got remedied through the work of lawyers. And of course, the gentleman was transferred down to Texas.
Yep.
And down there was a period of time where things were looking better. And I've had a chance to meet the widow and talk with her. And my heart goes out to her. She's a strong person who literally has taken it upon herself to try to make certain that this kind of thing never happens again. I'm not exactly certain what the administrative occurrences were that led to a hard stop on the ventilator at a given point in time in disagreement with what the family wanted for a plan going forward. That's an unusual situation because generally you're going to see your physicians, your hospitals, your hospital administrators, and your families and patients be able to work these kinds of things out without it coming to this. So I don't have the details, but I do know that when I was contacted, I said, well, the best thing we can do is let's try to find another place because it wasn't going to work there.
Yeah, that's too bad. And to have a doctor come up from Texas to fly him back home, and we were all rooting for this guy. And again, part of the William Shakespeare bill is part of that. They could have tried. I mean, you're right. No advocacy.
Advocacy is invisible until it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, you realize how desperately you need a champion in your court.
Well, a very good information on that. I appreciate your input on it. I hope if you do get the office, some of this stuff can be a little quicker solved.
I think that we need to not let better get in the way of good. Sometimes you need to just say, you know what? We've got a bad situation here. We're going to do this. It's not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than where we're at right now. And if we find some tweaks or adjustments or revisions that we can put in place next year, hallelujah, we'll do it. But folks, we've got to start running government more like a business.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of gridlock, stopping, and we don't have special sessions anymore. Special sessions aren't special. They're common. They happen every year. I think one of the best things, I had a bill that I tried to get passed. I couldn't even get a hearing, but I wanted to stop the $85 per day per diem payments for special sessions. And I just said, you know, if we're going to go into special session, we can make our own peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at home before we come. Well, that didn't go over very well.
Well, sometimes the truth really hurts.
It sure does.
Let's grab an overdrive here. And let's talk about your partner. I left him an email. I says, hey, if you want to be on HuttCast, because he's not responded yet, I would certainly like to invite him to have a conversation as well.
Oh, I'm sure you will. You have to realize that it's been
whirlwind of people.
6 days.
Yeah.
I get right now, I'm probably somewhere around 500 emails a day, perhaps something like 300 or 400 or 500 texts per day.
Wow.
The phone calls. And that's just my part. I mean, the non-specific emails and things that go to the campaign team at Dr. Scott Jenson in a generic way, I'm not even being exposed to those, but for perhaps the 1 out of 50 that gets forwarded to me. And I'm sure that Matt Brick has had the same kind of experience, that you just feel like, I mean, I oftentimes don't get my emails done until 12:30 at night. And I don't want to go to bed until I get my day's work done. And then, you know, I'm up the next morning at 5:30. So sometimes it's 12:30 to 5:30 to get my 5 hours off and running. And I'm going to guess that, you know, Matt's trying to find a rhythm to take care of all those requests. And,
right.
But I'll tell him, Hutt, that this is a fun conversation to be had, and you'll find him to be just a super high quality individual who has a wonderful blend of humility, humor, and obviously he has quite a lot of cognitive skill. I mean, you don't get your degree from Harvard in economics without being pretty darn sharp.
Okay. Overdrive. Let's talk. Just give people your honest, gut-wrenching closing statement.
People ask me, are you sure you want to be governor? And I tell him, I never said I wanted to be governor. I feel compelled to run. The words of Esther 4:14 speak to my heart. Have you considered that you're in the position you're in for such a time as this? I had two big things push me towards running to be the next governor of Minnesota. My wife endured 4 major surgeries within an 18-month period. These were major surgeries. And when she got all said and done, she told me she felt better than she had in a decade. And at the same time, COVID struck. And for whatever reason, I got pushed to the front of the line. And over a year or two, I developed a national profile whereby Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson and Rush Limbaugh were people who were covering my back, along with Dr. Drew and Tony Robbins and Glenn Beck. My life changed. It wasn't something that I'd planned, but there it was. And I think that I can be a good governor who will be laser focused on solving problems. I'm not addicted to universal approval. I'm not looking for a new career path. Arguably, I've lived 80% of my life. So if someone has to bear the bruises and the abrasions of trying to once again get Minnesota on a sustainable path, then I'll take those bruises and I'll take those abrasions, because if we don't change things in Minnesota now, we will not recognize this state down the road.
Whew. Nice job. Excellent job. Excellent closing statement.
Thank you.
My head's still spinning. Okay. I didn't expect quite a heartfelt. Wow. Okay. You've heard him, Dr. Scott Jenson. HuttCast. We will be airing this probably next week at 5 o'clock drop time for Sunday. I'll do some editing as far as commercials. What a great opportunity for you to come into my studio and do this. And don't forget, technology director at the state, you let me know. I'll come down and fill out my application.
Thank you, Hut. And if I could just say thank you to your listening audience. In so many ways, they're the heroes. We don't get common sense so much from our political class. We get common sense from the everyday man and woman who say, I'm going to pay attention to the world around me. I know what America can be. And I think we're seeing this election cycle a tremendous outpouring of energy and engagement, whereby people are saying, if I have been guilty of being complacent and standing on the sidelines, that's done. I'm getting out on the field with you, Doc. We're going to get this done. And if I have to take a few slings and arrows on your behalf, so be it. I'm at your side. And for that, I say to your listening audience, Hut, thank you so much and God bless you.
Well, thank you very much for being on. Let's make sure we cover how to get a hold of you, where the donation points are. Why don't you give us your website?
drscottjensen.com. DRSCOTTJENSEN.com. We've got multiple pages of our positions on the issues. If you'd like to volunteer, we would certainly appreciate that. If you'd like to make a donation, we sure appreciate that as well. We know the Democrats will outspend us 5 or 10 to 1, but we've also had the opportunity to watch the way they spend their money, and I can do more with $1 than they do with 10.
Outstanding. Don't forget, I want to get a picture of you before you go. We want to be in studio because that's nice for PR.
I would like that.
Okay. We are 1836 into this third segment. Doctor, again, thank you very much. I can't say enough. Thank you for coming in. And make sure you tell Matt that my door is always open. And I'll have this produced. HuttCast is going to pull the pin at 19 minutes, third segment. So HuttCast signing off. Until next time, group, thank you very much. And the Australian guys, yes, I heard you on the last. I got your emails. I love you. But we got to pick our path here. And hopefully you guys can get through this COVID lockdown government overreach. So HuttCast signing off. And that's a wrap for HuttCast. HuttCast is, again, a pragmatic approach to seeing things how some people see them. If you like our show, give us a thumbs up on the Facebook site. Again, for HuttCast, thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.